Hey everyone, thank you for tuning into the Sense of Beer Style podcast with me and Julia. Just a quick correction before you watch the rest of the Stylecast. The beer that I talk about, I mispronounce, and it is actually called Traquair. So as we move forward, just please forgive that mistake and understand it is Traquair and beautiful beer. Anyway, enjoy the show.
There are more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Hi, Julia. How are you doing?
Hi, Jeremy. Very excited for this Sense of Beer Style show and to be with you.
Well, this one is this one's going to be fun. They're all fun. I'm biased. It's like choosing a child, but this one is fun in particular because I love malt. I love complex malt. I'm a malt head. We have plenty of hop heads out there. I'm a malt head. And this one comes from Scotland. It is the Wee Heavy, also known as the Scotch Ale. These two beers, or the two names, are synonymous. Wee Heavy Scotch Ales, and it's just kind of fun to say, "What are you drinking?" I'm drinking a Wee Heavy. I mean, come on, that's kind of
It's
fun.
like two wee but heavy. It's two words that just kind of
yes, exactly.
dichotomy of each other. It's very odd. It's fun.
Yeah, it's a total oxymoron. Is it wee or is it heavy? But these beers are very malt forward, malt driven. They're dextrinous, they're caramelly, they're complex. They're just wonderful, wonderful beers to drink. And today we're going to dive into what they are and what to do with them. So let's talk. First of all, Julia, let's talk about the ingredients that go into these beers.
Right. And it's such a wide variety of ingredients that'll take us to a wide range of vital statistics. This is a style that will have a broad range for alcohol by volume, and you will learn more and hopefully embody more of those stats as we talk about it. So it's fascinating, right? The same style or approach for ingredients can take you to a different place within the spectrum of what this style is all about. And the big picture is, like you said, malt. Let's lead with malt. Malt is malted barley in this case, Scottish pale malt. That's what this beer showcases, whether it's, low 6% alcohol or closer to 9 or even bigger. That's what we are getting. So it's a great one to calibrate with that. And then the style guidelines will emphasize a wide variety or range of other ingredients are possible. Well, that's vague, right? But adjuncts can also be used for some sugar and some bump, right, in that alcohol by volume. May have some crystal malt, darker grains for color, but the emphasis is no peat smoked malt. So wee heavies
Absolutely.
are not anything to do with our beloved beverage of whiskey, except for whiskey that would be maybe made in the Scottish Isles, which could be known for peat for sure, also has malted barley as the base. That's really the only, I think, tie to whiskey, but no peated malt is a big, big part of the attributes here. And I just see that you served this because I want to talk about what you're seeing in the mix as well.
And you brought up a really good point before I dive into appearance, because people just assume it's Scottish. It must have that peat smoky flavor, and when it comes to the beer, no, it's that is inauthentic. And I've had some craft brewers use some peated smoke in there just for a variation. That's fun. It tastes great, but that's not traditional. That's not what these beers of any strength are meant to be. But this Wee Heavy, as you can tell, I'm showing this on the video. If you're listening to this, I have this beautiful, it kind of like this deep copper kind of garnet colored beer. It formed a little bit of a foam, but that foam did not persist. Why? Because there's alcohol in here. Alcohol and foam do not get along very well. Sometimes they can manage to arrange the relationship in such a way that you can have a stronger alcohol and you can have a good foam. But oftentimes it doesn't work that way. In this case, we've got this kind of like coppery, like kind of brown color, or it could be just like these ruby garnet highlights. Uh, the foam, when it's there, is just this beautiful tan, kind of dense foam. But like I said, it will dissipate fairly rapidly. If I left a room in my glass and swirled it a little bit, you might even actually see some legs of the alcohol dripping down, just because of the viscosity of the sugars and of the alcohol and everything else. That is what I expect to see. One thing I mentioned, it should be clear. These are not hazy beers. These are meant to be clear beers. So, and we'll talk about glassware a little bit later on, but make sure these are beautiful beers. Put them in a glass that just really shows them off and kind of dresses them up for the occasion that they're meant for. But that's the appearance. Let's talk about the aroma.
Well done, friend. And I am intrigued just based on the poetic description of the visual, right? It just sounds like and looks like, if you're actually watching us and not just listening, it looks pretty. So pour one in your glass, listen to this episode all again, and your mind, the synapses will fire just based on how it looks. And then the aroma, this is something that really gets the synapses firing and, that mind to palate connection. Aromatic compounds, the volatiles coming out of the glass are really going to emphasize the bready toasted malt, right? That Scottish pale malt. We've got the essence of lots of caramel and toffee, right? This is going to elicit things like, I love the descriptors in the style guidelines: lady fingers, right? English biscuits,
I
graham
love those.
crackers, nougat, maybe to butterscotch. What a seductive description of where malted barley can take us. And then it does allow the style for a faint hint of roast, but not definitely a standard or required. And then low to moderate dark or dried fruit esters, because this is an ale. So it's always important when you're studying your style guidelines. And forgive me, I didn't mention the yeast in the ingredients. It is not a lager yeast or a wild fermented beer. This is an ale with English or even Scottish ale yeast, which will give us some of those dark dried fruit esters. And then very low, if at all. I deliberately didn't mention hops because hops are not a big part of the profile of this beer, but you might get low earthy floral, orange citrus hops that will often come from the English or UK variant of hops that many of these brewers would happen to use. But this style is not going to emphasize hop flavor or aroma. It's more so going to have bitterness lightly to balance. And bitterness would bring us not to aroma, but to flavor. So take us through flavor, Jeremy.
Yeah. First of all, I kind of have a protocol. When I evaluate a beer, I go through malt first, then hop second, and then yeast third, and then everything else afterwards. And so I always look at malt first. It's just the habit that I'm in of evaluating beer, which is great for me because, like I said, I love malt. This is that malt forward beer, but malt is coming through in some really interesting ways and complex ways. Um, there's caramel, there's toffee, there's light roast, there's nut, there's all these different things, and some of those aromas that Julia mentioned, the lady fingers, graham crackers, nougat, butterscotch. Oh my! You can taste that, but it's all coming together in this this great, wonderful stew of these incredible sweet malt complex flavors that if you are one who thinks about your beer, this beer will keep you ruminating on this for weeks on end. The very first time I had this Trachear beer was about 8 years ago, and I still think about it. I still think about that experience, and it's just incredible. We mentioned earlier, I'm not going to get any peat smoke. It's that very specific boggy smoke aroma and flavor. We should not be getting that in any of these beers if it's authentic. But you can get a little bit of roast. You can get a sense. It's not smoke exactly, but it makes you think of smoke. There's a little bit of like a phenol in there too that just kind of makes you think, okay, this is Scottish, and this is wonderful. Those low to medium low hops are there to keep this from becoming a runaway dessert train. It's there just to add balance. We also have alcohol to balance. We have those phenols to balance. The esters that we get from all these from the malt should be a dark dried fruit, like could be like plums, or it could be prunes, raisins. The when it's a fresh beer, I expect the finish to be a little bit on the sweeter side. I've had plenty where they finish quite sweet. This one is a little bit older. I do have some flavors of age, but this is a type of beer that can take it and it can add it to the flavor mix. But that also dries out the finish as well when it's been sitting a little bit longer. But these are flavors you can expect from a wee heavy or Scotch ale. Let's talk about mouthfeel.
Yes, and mouthfeel on a wee heavy, part of the British strong ale category, which is what we're delivering to you today as one of the styles within that overall category. You're going to get medium to full bodied, right? Sometimes even thick, chewy, rich. Viscosity is mentioned, like some of that residual sugar
Yeah.
will sit heavy on the tongue. This is not a dry finish, leave you quenched and refreshed for the next sip. It's more of a sweeter, lingering finish that leaves your mouth watering for more of the same of 10 more of those sips. So the alcohol shouldn't be bitey, but it's going to be there. We want that alcohol smoothed out, not an ethanol bite. And then, that carbonation, there's going to be some, right? This is not a still beer. This is a beer that certainly based on the ABV levels can handle carbonation. It's really hard to carbonate beers over 8, 10, 12% alcohol. But the majority of these styles of the wee heavy are going to have moderate carbonation, and that will help give it some carbonic bite and dry it out just a touch. And with
Yeah.
that, what styles, Jeremy, would this compare to in terms of where people would want to kind of do a tasting and really get into the lane of what will make this wee heavy distinct from its brother or sister styles?
Yeah, this one is pretty simple. We can, as we mentioned in previous styles, we did a style cast on all the Scottish styles together because, for all intent and purpose, and I mean this with absolute respect, they are the same beer, just different strengths. Just the way that they're produced makes them, sister brother sister beers. This one is very much the same thing. It is just like those beers, but bigger flavor, bolder expression, more alcohol. So we can take any of those Scottish ales that you know and love, and this is just going to be, 10x what those are. We could also compare this to a British barley wine, but what we can expect, this is not going to be quite as strong as a barley wine, but we can't expect this to be darker, a little bit more caramel, kind of more, a little bit more of those phenols and that just Scottish essence that gives it a get makes you think smoke without actually being smoky, or thinks phenol without being terribly phenolic. Um, and so it's very akin to that British barley wine, but just very, very, its personality is deeply rooted in Scotland. Those are the ones that I would compare it to that would have, make any sense whatsoever. Um, but let's talk about the commercial examples, and then we'll go into vital stats.
Sure, and it's fun, especially to bring this up. I've never come across these two styles, but the style guidelines even make a comment on Fowler's Wee Heavy and 12 Guinea Ale, with really this style having lineage directly attributed to those two examples. But modern day commercial examples that are available for export as well, obviously in the country of origin in Scotland, Belhaven Wee Heavy. That was certainly my first introduction for it. I remember being in
Mhm.
the Brickskeller in Washington, D.C. and ordering it and just being blown away by its how it displayed, its malty prowess, I shall
Mm.
say. McEwen Scotch Ale has a super fun label on it. Keep an eye out for that. Orkney Skull Splitter certainly is a twist on it and trying to tell you, hey, you might feel a little density in the head from drinking too many of these from the residual sugar
It
or
it's
ABV.
definitely a memorable name.
Yeah, and so that I think gets sales just from the name. So seek it out though. It's definitely a reliable commercial example. Um, and then Duck Rabbit Brewery in the Carolina areas in the US has actually made it to the BJCP guidelines list for 2020 as commercial example of their wee heavy Scotch style ale and repeat medal winner, I believe, at Great American Beer Festival over the years. So there's some really easier ones to get that have been tried, tested, and are from the country of origin. And then you can find others that have just been inspired by the country of origin and are brewing it in their own domestic way.
Yeah. And of course, the one that I have that I first fell in love with is that Chockyar House that is from Scotland. And if I can throw in a few others that they're not part of the style guidelines, but they're common American craft examples that are pretty easy to find. Julie, you've probably had a bunch of these. The Great Divide Claymore is a great one. Oscar Blues Old Chub, I love that beer. And even Odell's 90 Shilling. These are beers that are fairly easy to find. So if you're having a hard time finding a true Scottish example, the American craft versions are not far off. They're if nothing else, they're damn tasty. So
Yeah, I
I
think
would I would
Odell's
imagine you've had those as well,
90
right?
Odell's 90 shilling falls over the years for BJCP is deliberately not being listed as an example under this.
Yeah,
But I have
yeah,
recently talked to somebody who was literally drinking in Scotland, and I was giving a presentation at a homebrew club earlier this week, and they were talking about Scottish ales. And if you're in Scotland, Scottish ales are that broadest of spectrum of categories, and then they slot in the wee heavy and the other versions and variants of the beer styles. Anything goes, I think, in terms of what people are considering within this category, and that's your right and privilege. It's just that if you're testing and studying for style guidelines, you always want to really write down what the
yeah.
BJCP guidelines are listing as your answer to that.
True, true.
Yeah,
Your point about Odell, absolutely. It's a nice entry point, but it's not the end point for sure for the style. But
absolutely.
let's
But
talk about some
statistics,
vital.
yeah,
Yeah,
go, just go.
the vital statistics. First thing, ABV. We mentioned that you could compare this to a British barley wine. British barley wines ABVs are 8 to 12. This one falls short of that. It's 6.5 to 10. So really, 6.5. It is slightly above average to quite strong. So you can find these wee heavies that are very drinkable and enjoyable without overcommitting yourself to the point where we could celebrate something significant on a Friday night with just one of these and be fine. So just understand that there's a bit of a range there. The IBUs, this is not a hop forward beer. They're there to add balance. So 17 to 35. I always, when I studied for advanced Cicerone, I always round it to the nearest five. So 15 to 35 is kind of for me works too. I mean, you're close enough, but it's in that range where it's present. You might be able to detect it, but it's not strong. When we get to color, the SRM for these, we're deep into copper to medium brown at 14 to 25 SRM, or we can translate that to European Brewery Convention EBC to 28 to 50, right around there. When we talk about original gravity, again, original gravity just gives us a sense of where's it going to land alcohol wise. This one goes from 1070 to 1.130. So we are breaking that 1.1 barrier and actually adding some diastatic power, some potential for alcohol there. And that's going to translate Plato wise from 17.5 to 32.5. But for those of you who speak Plato, that's quite strong. Where this lands for me, this is one of the few beers. This and Eisbach are one of those beers that the final gravity can actually land quite high and have this incredible body to it. For these wee heavies, we got 1018 to 1040. I think the Eisbach landed at 1032 or 1035 as far as a potential final gravity. That is huge. That is a huge mouthfeel. That's some, I'm going to use the phrase, that is a voluptuous body for these beers, and it's wonderful. If you're a Plato person, we're going to 4.5 to 10 for a final Plato on these. And overall, if you don't use ABVs, you're using Plato for your average your average alcohol. We're looking at 13 to about 22.5. Again, it could be easy drinking. It could be quite huge. There's a wonderful range there. So if you're looking for this to study, to enjoy, then pay attention to that because these beers have a little bit of variety. But
That's
with
great.
that, let's talk about glassware. These have some wonderful glassware too.
They really do, and it's one of the more unique glasswares that's traditionally not, frankly, easy to find outside of Scotland, but you can find them. It's the thistle glass. Frankly, the
Yeah.
thistle is named and modeled after the thistle plant, which has a great deal of symbolic significance to the people of Scotland. It's also got this bulbous bottom to it. Then it has straighter sides, so it gives the emphasis, I think, of the malt a chance to have your hand wrapped around it. There's also a foot and a stem, though, so you don't have to hold that bulbous area on the thistle glass. You could choose to not warm it up, but the glassware to me is always there, not only just to showcase the volatile compounds and really give emphasis to what might come out of that glass and volatilize out. It's also helpful if you want to get to a warmer serving temperature. So, 50 Fahrenheit, 10 Celsius, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, kind of that range, more cellar temperatures. Just because something like this is so malty, that's how I want to have it, is a little warmer instead of that 38-degree Fahrenheit, mass-produced lager refrigerator temperature range. That's not what I want this at. I want the malt to showcase. I want the volatiles to come out of the glass as it warms up, and I'd love it at 50 Fahrenheit, 10 Celsius for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Now, as far as what we'd want to eat with this, and with your blessing, I'll go first because I love it when you finish things off because you always have just amazing things to think about. But this beer, in fact, this particular beer, the Tracchiara, is very, very special to me. Had a dozen of those clouds part angels sing moments with beer, and this beer was one of them. But a beer like this with this malt complexity, I could really see something like having some gamey meat, some duck and cassoulet. Started off with like a bloomy rind cheese would be just really fun, just like this funky and creaminess, and just enjoy the richness of this meal, and maybe cap it off for dessert with like a creme brulee or a cheesecake or something like that. But my clouds parted angels singing moment with this beer. I was in Seattle, had this great little Airbnb looking over Elliott Bay, and I'd gone to go get some flagships or Beecher's flagship cheese and a little bit of a prosciutto. And I think I had some Marcona almonds with me as well, but I just got those and this beer, and I opened it up, and everything came together perfectly. It was one of the few moments of my life that I'll never forget. It was incredible. So I would urge to someone to go out and do some thorough research to see if they can reproduce that. But
I love it,
what
Jeremy, and
what
you
would you
could
add?
clearly tell you have a passionate feel towards
Ooh,
this style. And I frankly, you trumped some of what I would have said. You shared the creme brulee notion, getting towards more maybe gamey meats. I could see this with darker meats that are a little more, forgive the
yeah,
term, bloody for those that don't partake, to really stand up. And that you don't have to. The key in pairing is you don't just have to have complements. You can have contrast. So the caramel notes and that Butterfinger style,
mm,
lady fingers and whatnot, Butterfinger candy bar, you could seek that out in foods for complements. But contrast, I think it also could stand up to many a food that needs that alcohol and that residual sugar. I could see putting this with a contrast type of pairing and a little more capsaicin heat because of that maltiness, because of that
absolutely.
residual sugar and the viscosity. So it could stand up to maybe, spicy tacos or spicy nachos or chips and salsa. And I know I'm going out of the country and that sounds so scandalous, but give it a try because it's a fun palate trip
Yeah,
exercise just to taste the interaction of something more residually sweet, medium in alcohol, that's not going to exacerbate the capsaicin heat, but instead calm it. Sweet calms heat. And that's always where I go as a rule of thumb. If something's too high in alcohol, though, even if it does have residual sugar, that's going to backfire because ethanol will exacerbate that capsaicin heat. So just look out, but have fun and experiment. And I would say with that,
yeah.
there's your wee heavy.
There's your wee heavy. Enjoy, everyone. Go find one, drink it, and slancha.
Yes. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
And me, Jeremy.
tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.